Good morning, class. Today we're going to talk about the cottage industry and its effects on the Industrial Revolution. Your objective for today is students will explain why the agricultural revolution and the failure of the cottage industry were necessary precursors to the Industrial Revolution. We will go ahead and discuss what a precursor is in your warm-up. Let's define Industrial Revolution once again. It is the shift from human power to machine power in order to produce crops as well as manufactured goods. An entrepreneur is a person who starts a business. Precursor is something that comes before something else. So as we mentioned in the objective, you will explain why the agricultural revolution and the failure of the cottage industry were necessary precursors to the Industrial Revolution. So you're going to explain why the agricultural revolution, as well as the failure of the cottage industry, needed to happen before the Industrial Revolution. Now, the next vocabulary term is capital. And I am not referring to a city. I am referring to the investment money for a business. Whenever somebody starts a business, you will need some kind of capital, which is money to start it. A cottage industry is a business in a home. Textile is having to do with cloth. Now let's look at some interesting agricultural facts about our society today. Now, one bale of cotton can produce up to 1,217 men's t-shirts or 313,600 $100 bills. 1 acre of soybeans can produce up to 82,368 crayons. Farmers receive approximately 5 cents or less from each loaf of bread they sell. There are about 600 kernels, that is individual corns, on each ear of corn. Now, the reason why I bring these interesting facts up are because with the Industrial Revolution, we were capable of creating machinery and procedures that allowed us to mass produce large quantities of manufactured goods. Now let's talk about the important outcomes or results of the agricultural revolution. The first was the Norfolk crop rotation. If you recall, there used to be a 3-step rotation, one of which involved creating fallow land, which was land that was not in use. This was deemed very inefficient. So the Norfolk crop rotation system, which was a 4-step system, created the use of land in every single crop or year where crops were produced. So instead of having a fallow piece of land, you would go ahead and use a certain type of crop one year on that land, and then you would go ahead and rotate it around with the other 3 crops. That way, land was used more efficiently. Now, new farming equipment, like the seed drill, were also very important outcomes of the agricultural revolution. The seed drill allowed farmers to go ahead and dig holes, plant seeds, and cover them up all in one machine. Now, fertilizer also evolved during the agricultural revolution. uh, because of the diet that animals had at that time, which included crops from the Norfolk rotation system like turnips and clove. Animals were able to produce richer manure that then helped revitalize the soil. Now, what all of that did was it created a catalyst to the Industrial Revolution. As a result of producing more food, population began increasing. What that meant was because people were more well fed, people lived longer, and people were able to survive and not die from hunger, for example. Now, with the increase in population, people need goods. So that created a demand for goods that increased. With more people, that means more clothes had to be produced, more shoes had to be produced. Now, also, because of the agricultural revolution and because of the new machinery that was produced, that created um, a lot of people who did not have a job because of the agricultural revolution. And as a result, they needed work. So they moved to the cities. And that is where the Industrial Revolution ended up kicking off. In major cities is where people would move to work in factories that produced all of these goods that the increased in population demanded. So it created an increased labor supply because not all of the people needed to work on farms. As a result, new inventions, all of these together, along with new inventions, were pretty much the catalysts to the Industrial Revolution. Now, let's take a moment for your first quick write question. I would like you to go ahead and click on the link that you find in your notes and watch the short video. Once you are finished, go ahead and answer this question. How would you describe the process of weaving thread into cloth shown in the video? Is it an efficient method or an inefficient method? Explain your answer. Please go ahead and pause the video now and answer the question after you've watched the video. Now, this is cotton in its rarest form. And cotton is used to create many things. As we mentioned in the interesting facts, it can produce dollar bills, and it can also be used to produce t-shirts. Now, the problem with the cotton is that it is not in its natural form that is used to create t-shirts. Now, when cottage industries started sprouting out, remember, cottage industries are home businesses, they would take the raw wool from the cotton to certain families in rural areas. These families within their home would clean up and spun the cotton into thread. So they would go ahead and take the raw cotton wool, they would spin it into thread, and they would clean it up and remove any seeds or any twigs that the cotton had by hand. Then they would go ahead and send that cotton off to other families who used hand looms to weave thread into cloth. What would happen is they would get the thread that the previous families had cleaned up, and then they would weave it into what is called cloth. However, there was a slight problem with the way these cottage industries were working. The cottage industries could not keep up with demand for cloth. That means that they were not able to go ahead and produce as much cloth as they needed to stay in business. And as a result, instead of making money, sometimes they would end up losing money because they would not create or produce as much cloth that was needed.